Welcome to the Celestial Saga channel. Is history really written by the winners? What if one battle, shrouded in legend, is not as it is told? Today we will hear a story passed down through generations about the Battle of the Bulge. What is true and what is just fiction? Let's find out together. Can you tell me a story, Kalor? Asked the young Sarai, her voice brimming with the eager curiosity only youth could possess. She nestled closer to the elder. Kalor's feathers rippled gently in the night breeze as he smiled. Yes, little one. How about I tell you the story of a day in the life of a fungi farmer? Cora, however, interrupted with a puffed-up plumage, clearly in protest. That one is so boring. I want to hear about the Terran, something scary. Kaler chuckled softly and shook his head at the enthusiasm. You young ones always crave excitement, he said with a smile. The Terran have a special way of making their stories seem grander than they really are. That's what makes them so fascinating. Cora's eyes widened with anticipation. Her curiosity piqued. Very well, little one, Kaler said, settling into the tale. But remember, humans live short lives. It alters their view of things, and sometimes their tales can be more dramatic than the truth. Let me tell you about the Battle of the Black Sands. Kaler's plumage settled, and his voice took on a serious tone. 4 years before that battle, the Dragon Emperor attacked the Terran. His warriors descended upon one of their islands in a sudden, fierce attack. Thousands perished in the flames. Cities were reduced to ash, and the sky was choked with smoke. Wives and children were left mourning their losses. But the Terran leaders swore they would avenge their fallen. Cora leaned in closer. So, the Dragon Emperor had awoken something far greater in the Terran than he could have imagined. Kaler nodded. Yes, little one, the war truly began then. The Dragon Emperor struck first. Did they fight back? Cora asked eagerly. Of course, Kaler replied. The Terran's response was swift and relentless. They fought their way across the seas, retaking the islands that the Emperor had seized, winning victory after victory. But they knew their true test lay ahead on a small, barren island called Black Sands. Here, the Empire was determined to make its stand. Kaler's voice lowered, pulling Cora deeper into the story. The Dragon Emperor's command was simple. Hold the island to the last man. His general, Kuri, was a fearsome warrior, loyal beyond measure. It said that the Emperor gifted him the ability to breathe fire in battle as a reward for his unwavering loyalty. Could he really breathe fire? Cora asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. Kaler smiled, his feathers shimmering in the dim light. That's what they say. General Kuri had a plan, Kaler continued. He transformed the island into a fortress. Beneath the sands, his warriors dug deep, creating tunnels and strongholds hidden from the surface. The Terran arrived in force, Kaler added. Thousands of them, with warships and planes. Their metal beasts filled the skies. Captain Nimitz, a great Terran hero, looked over the battle plans and declared, "This will be easy. The island seems small and defenseless. No fresh water, no cover for the defenders. It should be a simple task." Did they think they were going to win so easily? Cora asked. They did, Kaler replied. One of Nimitz's officers agreed, saying, "The island shows little resistance. This should be over in a couple of days." Kaler leaned closer, his voice darkening. But they underestimated General Kuri. Beneath the barren island, his forces were waiting. The Terran opened with a bombardment from their warships, raining hellfire down upon the Black Sands for days. But the defenders did not emerge. Cora's voice trembled slightly. Did they think they had won? Kaler nodded. Yes, but something unexpected happened. One of the Terran warships strayed too close to the island within range of Kuri's hidden guns. Explosions ripped through its hull, killing Marines and sailors alike. The Terran realized, too late, that Kuri had fortified the island far better than they had imagined. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of the tale sink in. The Terran had planned for 10 full days of bombardment, but High Command ordered them to reduce it to 3 days. They claimed it was a waste of resources. Kaler's voice grew grim. General Smith, the Terran commander, was furious. "Do they expect me to send my Marines to their deaths?" he snarled. "They believe the island's defenses are weaker than we know." "And what happened next?" Cora asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Kaler's feathers flared slightly as his voice dropped. The day of the landing arrived. The Terran landing craft circled the waters like hungry sharks, their numbers swelling with each passing moment. Then the craft lined up, ready to storm the beaches. The order was given, and the line broke, heading straight for the shore. "What happened when they landed?" Cora asked eagerly. The Terran didn't know. But the moment they set foot on the black sands, they were stepping into a death trap, Kaler said, his voice growing darker. As the Terran forces approached the beach, one soldier joked, "After this bombardment, do you think any of the dragon's forces will be left?" His comrades chuckled nervously, though they all knew the truth. Beneath the laughter, there was tension. The black sands ahead held secrets, and soon they would discover just how dangerous those sands truly were. The armored vehicles rolled onto the shore, their engines roaring and belching thick black smoke into the air. But as soon as they hit the beach, they slowed. The coarse black sand dragged at their treads, weighing down the mechanical parts. The grit clogged the moving gears, and the vehicles struggled to advance. Kaler couldn't help but giggle at the lack of foresight. "The tanks got stuck," he said, amusement dancing in his voice. "You may laugh, little one," he added, "but the truth is, the dragon's general was preparing to strike at any moment." The mountain above the beach exploded in a flash of light, Kaler continued. The Terran soldiers stood frozen, staring in confusion, before realizing the flashing wasn't sunlight or reflection. It was the incoming breath of the dragon. "And then?" Cora asked, her voice filled with anticipation. Kaler's voice dropped, his words filled with the gravity of the moment. And then madness descended. The beach, once thought safe, became a killing ground. The stuck vehicles became deadly obstacles. Soldiers fell left and right, caught in a storm of gunfire from the dragon warriors. The enemy had the upper hand. They would appear, fire from hidden positions, and vanish almost as if by magic. The Terran were fighting an invisible enemy, one that never left an opening, Kaler said, his voice low and tense. One soldier muttered, "Not getting hit out here is going to be like trying to run through the rain without getting wet." Another soldier came up beside him, looking at the cliffs rising ahead. "Hey, what's with the cliffs? I thought intel said it was supposed to be flat." The first soldier grumbled, "Guess not. What are we supposed to do with these vehicles? They can't climb that," one of the officers barked. "I don't know, figure it out. Get some engineers over here and clear us a path," came the quick reply. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, a hero was on the move. Sergeant Basilone, an enormous Terran built like a walking tank, had already earned medals for his bravery. Now, eager to fight once again for the Terran cause, he was ready to face whatever came next. At the moment, however, his squad was pinned down, trapped under the fire of a bunker ahead. "Cover me, boys," Basilone called out. "I'm going in." "That's suicide, Sarge," one of his men shouted. "Someone's got to keep us moving forward," Basilone replied, determination blazing in his eyes. "It's suicide to stay here." Without waiting for a response, he charged forward, his heart pounding as he sprinted across the battlefield. He reached the bunker, tossed a charge inside, and ducked for cover. A loud explosion reverberated across the battlefield, leaving the enemy's bunker smoking. "Come on, boys, move up," Basilone called, his voice filled with confidence. "I got him." His squad rushed forward, rallying behind him. "That was stupid, Sarge. You could have gotten yourself killed," one of his men panted. "You worry too much," Basilone grinned, but before he could rejoin his men, something caught his eye. An armored vehicle was stuck, struggling to navigate a minefield, its crew hopelessly exposed without a spotter. "Hey," he called out to his squad, "I'll be right back." Without hesitation, Basilone walked into the minefield, making his way toward the vehicle. Just as he neared it, a shell came down from the sky with a deafening roar. Cora gasped, bristling with shock. Kaler stopped and looked down at her gently. "Oh, I'm sorry, little one. Perhaps this is too much for you." Cora shook her head, eyes wide. "No, it's okay. Please keep going. I need to know what happens." "Are you sure?" Kaler asked, his tone soft. "Yes," Cora whispered, her voice steady. "I'm sure." Kaler smiled at her wide-eyed eagerness. "Okay then. Where was I? I think I was about to tell you that Basilone—" Cora nervously interrupted. "He was about to die, right?" "Little one," Kaler said softly, his tone growing serious. "Are you sure you want to hear this part?" Cora straightened up, her expression hardening with determination. "Yes, I want to hear the story." Kaler sighed. "Very well." His voice became softer as he continued. The deafening roar filled the air, but Basilone was okay. Cora's eyes lit up with relief. "He's okay," she exclaimed. "Yes," Kaler replied, nodding. He made it to the vehicle, attached a chain to the front of it, and single-handedly pulled it to safety. Basilone called out to his squad, "See, boys, you just have to put your back into it." "That's why they gave you the Medal of Honor," one of his men replied with a grin. Barcelona gave them a confident wink. "Now come on, men, we've got to get these guns off the beach." But as Barcelona led the charge across the airfield, something terrible happened. He was struck down by the dragon's forces. His body fell without warning. "What?" Cora cried, her plumage flaring. "But he was a hero." "Yes," Kaler said gently. "He was a hero, Cora, but listen, if you want me to tell the story, you must listen. This is a story of war, a great Terran battle. There will be death and tragedy." Kaler's voice grew solemn. The soldiers were shaken by Sergeant Barcelona's death. He had been more than just a man to them. He was a hero of unimaginable strength. To see him cut down by the dragon's men was devastating. The elder paused for a moment, his eyes flickering as he remembered. It only got worse. On the west side of the island, the battle was at a stalemate. The dragon's forces had dug deep into the cliffs, shaping the rocks to serve as their cover. The Terran tried everything to dislodge them, but the defenses were too strong. Kaler's voice lowered. The losses were extensive. Explosions rocked the Terran forces at the base of the cliffs. The ground shook, and the night sky was lit by the sight of burning Terran vehicles. As the sun set, the darkness was only broken by the flames of war. The Terran leader gasped as he read the report. The death counts were staggering, thousands lost, and still, the battle raged on. Cora sat in silence, her gaze fixed on Kaler, the weight of the story settling heavily on her young heart. Kaler's voice took on a more determined tone as he continued. The next morning, the Terran began with renewed vigor. The losses had been great, but their resolve was greater. Supported by the battleships offshore, the Terran launched another assault. This time, they were making progress. At the west cliffs, a lucky barrage from the ships triggered a landslide, sending rocks and debris crashing down onto the dragon's forces, taking out countless troops. Cora's eyes widened in awe. So they were winning? They were making progress, Kaler nodded. With the warships continuing their assault, the Terran pressed forward. But while things were improving on the west side, the east was another story. The Terran had the enemy pinned down, but the dragon's general had buried his defenses deep within the mountain. Every step forward was met with fiercer resistance. Kaler paused, letting the weight of the struggle sink in. "What do we do to get rid of this infestation?" one man thought aloud, frustration clear in his voice. Another Terran, gripping a massive weapon, answered with grim determination. "We burn him out." In his hands was a monstrous weapon, one that spewed a gel so hot it burned like the breath of a dragon itself. Cora gasped. "Like the dragon?" Kaler nodded solemnly. "Yes, the Terran had their own fire, and they weren't afraid to use it." Armed with this weapon, they eagerly set to work clearing the defenses that had caused them so much frustration. They attacked the tunnels and strongholds where the enemy had dug in, flushing them out with fire. His voice grew quiet, almost reflective. That night, for the first time, the Terran didn't have to watch their own vehicles burn. Instead, they watched the flames consume the enemy's defenses, lighting up the mountainside. It was a small victory, Kaler added, but one they needed. They took a moment to breathe, knowing they were one step closer to breaking the dragon's hold on the island. Cora sat in silence, imagining the glow of the flames flickering against the dark sky, the Terrans standing tall, their hearts filled with both exhaustion and hope. The Terran forces worked methodically to clear the rest of the mountain. They called for airstrikes and bombardments, and the dormant volcano seemed to come alive, spewing smoke and fire from the blasts. The soldiers, however, waited for the signal to advance, but it never came. Cora's impatience flared. "What's taking so long?" she asked. Kaler mimicked the frustration of the soldiers. "Word is they can't get the Shermans over here," a soldier muttered, staring at the mountain. "Damn," another cursed, as they watched the soldiers slowly return to positions they had cleared hours ago. "We can't afford to wait any longer," Colonel Horse, a seasoned leader among the Terran, declared. "We have to move." With that, the order to attack was given, and the Terran launched an assault. Close quarters combat broke out as they stormed the remaining defenses. The enemy fought fiercely, using every advantage of hidden positions and strongholds. The Terran forces were close to the top when the defenses behind them sprang back to life, trapping them between two fronts. That's when the Terran flamethrowers came into play. Using small arms fire to distract the fortified positions, they snuck up and drenched them in burning gel. It was an effective tactic, and the Terrans slowly took the mountain inch by inch, filling the bunkers and concrete strongholds with fire. Cora's eyes widened as she imagined the chaos. The Marines charging through, clearing enemy forces. The battle was fierce, but the Terran began to turn the tide. Finally, the Shermans arrived. Their large cannons blasted through the remaining defenses, taking out the last pockets of resistance. The Terran cleared the mountain down to the last man. By nightfall, the Terran were just below the summit of the dormant volcano. Exhausted from the battle, they began to settle in, finally allowing themselves some rest. But just when they thought the fight was over, something appeared in the sky. Cora gasped. What was it? Kaler's eyes gleamed with tension. Dragons. A formation of them, huge and terrifying, coming from the mainland to reinforce their troops on the island. Their massive wings beat the air as they approached, flames flickering in the distance. Cora bristled. Did they make it to the island? Kaler shook his head. No, the Terran had prepared for this. The warships surrounding the island opened fire as the dragons neared. One by one, they were struck down, their bodies tumbling from the sky. Cora relaxed slightly, but Kaler wasn't finished. One of the largest dragons, its wings torn from the warship's fire, let out a final thunderous roar. With a last surge of strength, it turned toward the Terran fleet, its target in sight. Cora gasped. The Bismarck? The dragon dove, full force, aiming directly for the ship. With its dying breath, it unleashed a torrent of fire. The flames tore through the Bismarck's hull, setting it ablaze. The crew fought back, but the damage was too great. The beast's claws raked across the deck, tearing it apart, dragging the mighty ship down into the depths of the sea. We lost the Bismarck, Cora whispered, her feathers trembling. Kaler nodded gravely. Yes, little one. A great ship and many men were lost. But even as the Bismarck sank, the battle didn't end. Another dragon, slightly smaller but just as deadly, let out its own final breath of flame. Its fire engulfed the Saratoga, one of the Terran's other warships. The Saratoga's hull groaned under the attack, smoke pouring from its deck as the flames licked at the metal. Cora's eyes widened. Did they lose the Saratoga too? Kaler shook his head. No. Though the Saratoga was badly damaged, the Terran fought to keep her afloat. The crew worked tirelessly, refusing to let another ship fall. The Saratoga limped through the battle but did not sink. His voice softened as the battle reached a brief lull. The rest of the day passed with little incident. The Terran had secured more than half the island. Tensions remained high, but there was a sense of relief in the air. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. The Secretary of the Terran Navy, who had been accompanying the fleet during this mission, decided to go ashore, eager to witness the success firsthand. Cora tilted her head, intrigued. Why would he want to go ashore when the battle wasn't over? Kaler's feathers ruffled slightly in amusement. Pride, little one. Victory had come at a great cost, and in the sight of the Terran flag flying atop the hill, it was a powerful symbol of their progress. As the Secretary approached the shore, he saw that flag standing tall against the smoke-filled sky. It was a powerful image. Cora asked eagerly, "What did he do?" Kaler smiled slightly. Well, as they neared the shore, the Secretary turned to the Lieutenant General accompanying him and said, "I'd like that flag as a souvenir." It seemed like an innocent request, but it set off a chain of events none of the men on the ground expected. The general, following orders, phoned Colonel Johnson, who was in charge of the battalion that had raised the flag. He asked for the flag, expecting the request to be honored without question. Kaler's voice deepened, the tension palpable. But Colonel Johnson didn't take kindly to that request. He hung up the phone, visibly irritated, looked at his men and said, "To hell with that. The flag belongs to the men of this battalion." Cora gasped. He refused? Kaler nodded. He did. Johnson understood what that flag meant. It wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of everything his men had fought for, bled for, and died for. So instead of handing it over, he sent his assistant to find a replacement flag, calling after him to make it a bigger one. Cora giggled at the thought. Kaler chuckled. Yes, little one. The flags were quickly swapped out before the Secretary arrived, none the wiser. The larger flag was raised in place of the original, and the men of the battalion kept their prize. Cora's eyes sparkled. That's pretty funny. Kaler smiled. Yes, little one. That night, there was a well-deserved celebration. The Terran had secured a foothold on the island and earned a brief moment of peace. They drank, laughed, and for the first time since the battle began, they allowed themselves to believe they were on the road to victory. But Kaler's tone shifted, becoming somber. The worst was still to come. The battle was far from over. The northern part of the island still held the dragon's fiercest warriors, and they were preparing to strike back with all their strength. Cora's plumage flattened slightly, feeling the weight of the story once more. "What happened next?" she asked. Kaler's voice dropped as he continued. The rest of the battle seemed straightforward. The Terran planned a simple push across the northern airfield to the other side of the island. The day began with shelling the dragon's positions, followed by the advance of Sherman tanks with Marines close behind. Victory seemed within reach. Cora leaned in, sensing the rising tension, but then Kaler paused. Disaster struck. Cora fluttered nervously. What happened? The dragon's forces had been waiting. As the Terran tanks advanced, the enemy opened fire. Anti-tank rounds rained down from the bridges, knocking out the Shermans one by one. The dragon's troops had the high ground, and they were ready for the attack. Cora gasped. They were waiting for them. Kaler nodded grimly. Yes, the ridges above were hollowed out, concealing entire batteries of anti-tank weapons. The Terran were exposed on the plateau below with no cover, just open ground. It was a massacre. One of the Terran soldiers shouted to his comrade as explosions rocked the area. "We're sitting ducks out here! Hold the line!" came the reply from his sergeant, his voice straining to be heard over the chaos. "We need to take out those guns, or we're finished." Kalor's voice lowered, but they couldn't. For days, the two sides were locked in a stalemate. The Terran would shell the dragon's positions, only for the enemy to retaliate with relentless fire from the ridges. No ground was gained. It was a grueling back and forth. Cora shivered. That sounds awful. It was, Kaler continued. On the 9th day, a squad from the battalion that raised the flag was advancing to the front lines. They were battle-hardened, but war can strike when you least expect it. A shot rang out. Kaler said urgently, "One of the men dropped, hit by a sniper." "They're picking us off," one of the soldiers shouted, diving for cover. The squad scrambled behind rocks, trying to find a way out of the open ground. "What's the plan, Sarge?" another soldier asked, fear in his voice. The sergeant scanned the horizon. "We're pinned down. No way forward unless we get air support or—" But before he could finish, a massive explosion shook the earth. A friendly shell meant for the enemy fell short. The men screamed, and a second explosion claimed another soldier. Before they could react, a mortar hit nearby, wounding a third. He shouted, "They killed me!" before slumping over. Cora's crest flattened as she whispered, "That's terrible." Kaler sighed. It was. And the next day, Lieutenant Johnson, the one who had stored the original flag, was killed in a barrage. Out of all those who helped raise the flag, only a few remained. Cora sat silently, the weight of the story pressing down on her. But Kaler continued. Something remarkable happened. Amid all the chaos, a wounded Terran bomber, returning from a successful run, radioed the island, requesting clearance to land. "Permission granted," came the voice from the tower. The pilot's reply was filled with relief. "Thank God for the Marines." The southern airstrip had been secured, Kaler said. The bomber touched down safely, and the crew leapt from the aircraft, kissing the ground and shouting their thanks for the Marines still fighting on the ground. It was a rare moment of joy. Cora smiled slightly. "That's amazing," Kaler nodded. That was just the first. Over 2,000 such landings would take place as the Great War continued. Even as the fight raged on, those pilots found safety on the island thanks to the Terran forces. He shifted his tone again. But even as the Marines welcomed those grateful pilots, the battle wasn't over. The Terran brought in more tanks, flame tanks equipped to shoot fire. They'd learned from their earlier success. One of the Marines on the front line called out, "These babies are going to toast them good," as the flame tanks rolled in behind the regular ones. Kaler's feathers shimmered as he described the scene. The strategy was simple. The regular tanks would punch a hole in the enemy's fortifications, and the flame tanks would follow, filling the tunnels with fire. The enemy's strongholds couldn't withstand the heat. Cora's plumage rose, eager for the outcome. Did it work? Kaler smiled slightly. It worked, but progress was slow. There were only so many flame tanks, and the enemy's defenses were well entrenched. The battle dragged on, but with each step forward, the Terran drew closer to victory. Kaler's voice deepened as the story reached a critical turning point. The enemy forces continued to frustrate the Terran, he said. Every time they shelled the ridges or tried to advance, the dragon's troops seemed to be waiting. The stalemate dragged on. and the Terran knew they needed to change their approach. Cora remained transfixed. It was then that the decision was made, Kalor continued. No more bombardments. The commander ordered, "We'll approach them quietly, radio silent, no warning. We'll strike while they're off guard." The Terran were eager for the change. Tired of fighting an enemy that always seemed prepared, they moved like shadows, ready for anything. Cora whispered, "Did it work?" Kaler chuckled softly. Oh, it worked. Much to their surprise, when the Terran arrived at the enemy's forward positions, they found them asleep. Asleep? Cora blinked in surprise. Kaler nodded, satisfaction in his voice. Yes, little one. The enemy, so used to hearing the thunder of artillery before any Terran attack, had grown complacent. They hadn't expected the Terran to come silently, and the result was swift and brutal. The Terran made quick work of them, clearing out the positions without losing the element of surprise. Cora relaxed as the tension eased, but Kaler wasn't finished. The Terran weren't done. They pressed on, moving deeper into the enemy's territory undetected. They had the advantage now, and they intended to keep it. However, as they continued forward, they were spotted by an enemy fortification. Cora bristled. What did they do? Kaler smiled. They acted fast. With flamethrowers at the ready, the Terran set the fortification ablaze before the enemy could react. The fire spread quickly, consuming the stronghold, and the Terran pushed deeper into the dragon's territory. Cora leaned forward, her eyes wide. Did they win? Kaler nodded. With the element of surprise on their side, the Terran quickly took out the remaining defenses, moving from one position to the next. The dragon's forces, caught off guard, fell one after another. By the time the enemy realized what had happened, it was too late. Only a few of the dragon's final forces remained, and the Terran had already secured most of the island. Cora exhaled softly, her gaze fixed on Kaler. They did it. Yes, little one, they did, Kaler said. The battle was nearly won, but even with most of the island secured, the battle wasn't over yet. The Terran still had more to face before the Dragon Emperor's forces would be truly defeated. It was nearly midnight when the dragon soldiers made what they thought would be their final desperate effort. With little hope, they sought only to make their emperor proud. In a last-ditch act of loyalty, they strapped explosives to their bodies, ready to sacrifice themselves and take as many Terran with them. Cora asked nervously, "They were going to blow themselves up?" Kaler nodded solemnly. "Yes, little one." At the stroke of midnight, they left the safety of their bunker. "For the Empire," they cried, silencing their radios as they charged into the darkness. General Curry tried to stop them. "Don't do this," he pleaded over the radio. "We can do more alive than dead." Cora's eyes widened. "Did they listen?" Kaler shook his head. "No, their communications had already gone silent, but the Terran were ready. Throughout the day, they had noticed unusual enemy movement and stayed vigilant, prepared for an attack." Kaler's voice grew chilling. The dragon soldiers, full of fire and fury, were met with Terran artillery rounds and small arms fire. Their numbers dwindled quickly as they were caught in the deadly crossfire. One of the Terran soldiers shouted, "Hold the line! Don't let them get close!" Another called out, "They've strapped bombs to themselves!" Cora trembled as she imagined the scene. "Did any of them survive?" Kalor nodded. "A few." As the chaos unfolded, a dragon colonel managed to catch up with the remaining bombers. He carried a message from General Curry ordering them to stand down and retreat. With their numbers decimated, the surviving soldiers reluctantly complied. Cora sighed. "So it was over?" "Not quite," Kaler said gravely. As dawn broke, the Terran surveyed the battlefield. The devastation was immense. Bodies lay scattered, the remnants of the dragon's once mighty forces. One Terran soldier looked out over the carnage and muttered, "They have to be running out of men." Cora asked anxiously, "And the general?" Kaler's eyes narrowed. General Curry had retreated to the far north of the island, his units fiercely defending his withdrawal. It was said that anyone who dared stand in his way was scorched by his legendary fire breath. Cora gasped. "So he really could breathe fire?" "That's what they say," Kaler replied with a slight smile. Back home, news of the battle had reached the Terran Republic. The death toll shocked them. "No island is worth this many lives," the people cried, their voices echoing across the ocean, even reaching the black sands where the battle still raged. Kaler's tone grew more serious. In an attempt to calm the public, the battle was officially declared over. A ceremony was held, and speeches were made as the flag was raised again. But even as the speeches continued, the fighting didn't stop. On the northern end of the island, the Tehran pressed on, sending in flame tanks to systematically destroy the remaining pockets of resistance. Waves of fire slowly and methodically weeded out the last of the dragon's defenders. "So that was the end?" Cora asked. Caller's feathers ruffled as he leaned in. "No, little one. The final stand was yet to come." Cora's eyes widened as she hung on to every word. General Curry had promised to fight to the last man, and he kept his word. By then, he had only 300 soldiers left, but he wasn't finished. Under the cover of darkness, he gave a final order: march south, silently, with no lights. Cora's voice was barely a whisper. "Did they?" Kaler nodded. In total silence, the dragon's remaining soldiers moved deep into the Tehran ranks. Even now, it remains a mystery how so many managed to pass through the Tehran sentries undetected. By the time the Tehran realized what had happened, it was too late. The dragon soldiers had surrounded one of the tank camps. Kaler paused for dramatic effect. And then they shouted "Bonsai" and charged. Cora gasped, a slight jump in her expression. "Did they stop them?" Kaler nodded, though his voice remained somber. "Yes, the final enemy troops were dealt with, but the cost was great. Many heroes on both sides fell that night. And just as General Curry had vowed, his soldiers fought to the very end. He kept his promise." Cora's voice was small, almost hesitant. "But what about General Curry? Did he die?" Kaler's gaze softened. "No one knows for sure, little one. In the center of the battlefield, where Curry had made his final stand, a massive crater was found. The walls of the crater were made of melted volcanic rock, as if the general had unleashed such heat and fury that he melted himself along with anyone who dared challenge him. His body was never found." Cora asked incredulously, "So he just disappeared?" Kaler smiled gently. "That's the mystery, isn't it? Some say he burned himself into legend, leaving nothing behind but fire and ash." Cora tilted her head. "And what about the Dragon Emperor?" Kaler's eyes twinkled as he leaned back. "Ah, little one, that is a story for another time." Cora leaned back, her mind swirling with thoughts of the tale she had just heard. Images of dragons, brave soldiers, and fierce battles danced in her head. After a moment, she looked up at Kaler and asked, "Did that really happen?" Kaler's feathers shifted gently as he smiled. "Terran stories are full of both fact and fiction, little one. The Tehran have a saying, history is written by the victors. That, along with their short lifespans, sometimes leads to embellishments. It's for this reason that we must consider the historical documents as fiction." Cora's eyes flickered with curiosity. "All of it?" Kaler chuckled softly. "Anything for which we don't have direct supporting evidence, yes. So much of their history has been lost to their ever-changing technology and flawed archival systems. It's only been in the last few centuries that we can say with certainty that their records are fact." He paused, his feathers glimmering in the soft light. "But I think we can safely say there was once a great battle on an important island between two powerful forces. One side was victorious. From that, we can take lessons from the tactics and let our imaginations run free with the narrative, secure in the knowledge that the strife of the past remains in the past, so long as we learn from it." Cora nodded, a yawn escaping her as sleep began to settle over her. "I think I understand," she said, her voice growing softer. "Good night, Sage." "Good night, Cora," Kaler replied, his voice gentle as she drifted off to sleep, thoughts of the Terran and their fantastical stories finding their way into her dreams.